a mesmerizing tale of a little boy who has reincarnated in a poor family, and who out of poverty and hunger looks for ways to make his and others' lives better with the help of using various magic spells. He manages to bring in some wealth in his house with the aid of an opportunist merchant who buys his stuff for peanuts at first, but then introduces him to a range of magnificent fantasy animals that he calls work beasts. The story begins with a young boy who seems to have gained some familiarity with earth magic. An inn used the magical bricks that he created, therefore that inn was infused with his mana, which means that he could use his store memory magic on it. He is super excited because finally, the inn recreation experiment was a success. The story shifts in a flashback when the protagonist goes through some strange events. Earlier he was a resident of Japan, but now he has gone through reincarnation. Eerily, he is unable to move or remember anything. He wonders whether he was involved in an accident. The protagonist has transformed into a wailing helpless baby, and currently, his cries bring in a beautiful young woman who wonders whether he is hungry. The protagonist tries to guess whether she is a nurse, and that if she is, then he must be in some kind of hospital. To his astonishment, the young woman uses a magical spell Illuminate to lighten up the whole place. It dawns on the protagonist that he has been reincarnated into another world where magic exists. He realizes that this isn't Japan or any known world. The protagonist keeps on playing his own tune. After all, he cannot help it. It is his job as an infant to create tantrums. The woman holds up the baby close to her bosom to feed him. Again, the protagonist is helpless because his body won't listen to him, no matter how humiliated he is. The protagonist feels very lucky to be reincarnated into a magical world and has a beautiful lady as his mother. Soon, he has begun his new life as a baby, but he doesn't have a name yet. Apparently, there will be a naming ceremony when he is 6 years old, and then he will call Ashela's and Marie's third child. Whenever his mother takes him out and flaunts him to other people, there are a lot of oohs and ahs, followed by remarks about his cuteness, but somehow the protagonist is getting a bad feeling for a reason. But still, he feels excited about this whole magic thing. So one day while lying idle in his crib, he glances here and there and makes a guess that this room doesn't have anything to brighten it. This means there is quite a possibility that magic is used in day-to-day affairs, because he had already seen his mother using it to illuminate the room earlier. The protagonist gets all exuberant, because this means that now even he can use magic. He begins imagining himself as a grown-up, using all fire, wind, ice, lightning, earth, and water magic. Next, he decides to give it a shot. So the poor baby begins to wriggle and jiggle, but not even a meager ant is generated. He widely shakes his limbs here and forth to release some inside-wincy bit of magic, but to his sheer frustration, nothing happens. As normally babies do, the protagonist also expresses his agitation through a deafening wail, and a bewildered mother comes running towards his crib, illuminating the whole room by using a magic spell. He immediately stops crying when his mother picks him up, but deep down he is greatly disappointed. The protagonist resolves to switch up the effort. First, he will need to observe how his family members use magic and learn from that. He deeply observes his mother generating the Illuminate spell. From the looks of it, it seems as if she is somehow pulling some sort of energy from their bodies. It dawns on him that to conduct magic, he will be requiring mana. Meanwhile, he is trying to communicate his words of wisdom to his mother in the form of goos and gaws, and his mother is very much amused and delighted by the enigmatic sounds he is generating. The protagonist is humiliated to the core as he realizes that he hasn't developed a proper voice box to chant spells. So the first order of business is to find mana within him and to train it vigorously. 3 years pass away in a jiff, and the protagonist spends every day training his mana. But bad luck, he is still unable to use magic. Not only that, he is always hungry because they are poor farmers. The poor child is only 3 years old, but poverty has already taken a toll on him. But the protagonist doesn't give up and decides to look for food starting from that day. He goes deep inside a forest and comes towards a clearing. He ponders that there are 2 types of mana. The first exists within one's body, while the other occurs in the surroundings. Even the air contains mana. Mana from outside the body can be inhaled and then incorporated with the mana already inside one's body. When the protagonist first notices that, he begins fusing them together around his lower abdomen, just below the stomach. He has been attempting to control and spread it across his body. Thanks to this, he is now able to refine the mana inside his body. Still, there is a catch. One needs to be 6 years old and attend the naming ceremony to be able to use magic. So now he has to wait for another 3 years. That being said, he would only be able to use lifestyle magic like illumination, ignite, and create water. He knows that his parents only know how to use lifestyle magic and nothing else. Ever since he was a baby, he tried and tried again to use magic. At present, he places both his hands on the forest ground and suddenly feels that he is getting some positive response. His eyes widen in bewilderment, but then he closes his eyes and begins to feel that some sort of energy from the ground is being absorbed by him. Then he takes deep breaths. Next, he brings it toward the chest and then lets it flow through the limbs. Once the mana has reached the edge of the body, he reaches out to it and brings it back, going slowly without stopping. After that, he carefully circulates the mana throughout the body. He notices that while still in the air, the mana looks like a gas, but the magic that has been created inside the body will look more like a sticky liquid. As the liquid overflows, the protagonist gathers the mana into his palms and releases everything into the soil. He decides to take it easy and not to lose focus at any cost during the whole process. However, because he carelessly tried a spell, the mana that he had worked so hard pouring into the soil has scattered. He begins to imagine it, because when one is training their mana, imagery is very important. It wouldn't be a far-fetched claim to say that the very essence of the field lies in the quality of the soil. Soil that is soft and fluffy, slightly warm to the touch, and packed with nutrients. He remembers that in his previous life, his grandmother out in the countryside would use an all-purpose fertilizer on the soil. So he removes all the weeds and cultivates the soil properly. Now, the field should be allowed to receive proper drainage and sunlight. Soon, he begins to feel the soil's scent, its warmth, and then his heart begins to thump wildly. Suddenly, there is a strange rumble coming from deep inside the soil, and he is forced to open his eyes. To his astonishment, some doyle ridges have been formed in front of him. He cries in triumph that finally he manages to use some magic spell. He observes that the ridges are about 10 square meters. The topography varies though. The fact is that they are farmers, yet the soil in their fields is hard and full of weeds, a total fiasco. The protagonist hasn't seen any agricultural machinery, which means that the technology over here is way behind, compared to his previous world. But he is delighted because he managed to tame the soil. The magic is pretty simplistic, but still, it is the first time since he was reborn that he finally managed to use some magic. Suddenly his stomach begins to growl, and using all the magic made him quite hungrier. He resolves to start planting right away, and plants some small bunches of a root vegetable called 20 that can be eaten after 20 days. He makes sure to plant all the bunches equidistant from each other and pat the soil properly after planting. 20 is a standard feed for livestock, popular among food farmers as a good-for-nothing vegetable. He observes that the vegetable looks terrible and tastes awful as well. The poor guy is so hungry that he actually doesn't care about the reputation of 20s. His stomach begins to growl angrily like a wild beast, so he quickly waters the fields, which is way too hard for a 3-year-old. It has been 5 days now since the first time he succeeded in using magic. Every day he has been using his magic on the soil. Because of his toil, a part of the land has been transformed into a field full of soft soil. His intensive labor bears fruit as the flowers begin to sprout readily. Flowers in bloom are a good sign of an excellent harvest, but usually takes them 20 days for a full bloom. However, this happened only after 5 days. Obviously, that is quite fast and is not normal at all, but he knows that he cannot do anything about that. He tugs and pulls one of the plants and manages to pluck out a whooping large bunch of 20s. He is surprised by the number of vegetables in a bunch, more than 10 in each bunch. Under normal circumstances, there should be only a few edible roots. Immediately he plucks one of the vegetables, washes it thoroughly, and takes a bite. A rave of bitterness plagues his mouth, and he claims that it tastes awful, and so begins the revival of his farm. After improving the soil, he turns his attention to selective breeding. He thinks the vegetables in his field are growing too fast, so he is kind of apprehensive. For instance, 20s usually take 20 days to grow, but this batch accelerated in 5 days only. The protagonist ponders that there is nothing unusual about what he has eaten so far, and if he cared too much he would have died of starvation. The protagonist remembers that the food from his past life had been delicious and attractive. Farmers and researchers selectively bred everything for quite some time to get it to where it was. The depressed child decides to be patient. He consoles himself that there is something in this world that completely defies common sense, and that is magic. He doesn't get the theory behind that, but the vegetables in his fields grow really quickly, so he will capitalize on that. He keeps on stuffing those awful 20s despite their awfulness and vows to improve their taste. That is quite a big challenge, as he has no idea how to do that. The following night, while safely tucked in his bed, the protagonist remembers hearing a story back in his class about green peas. The researchers would check the wrinkles of thousands of green peas with their own eyes, and with the data they collected, they discovered the principle of inheritance, or Mendel's law. But for now, the protagonist doesn't have enough varieties of 20s to crossbreed. All that overthinking makes him drowsy, and soon he is transferred to Slumberland. The next morning, he decides that the first order of business is to check the features of the 20s, so he pulls out a couple of bunches and begins to observe them intently. He finds out that not only are the roots different, but there is also a minor difference in the stem and flower. He notices that some 20s are black, while others are purplish red. Some are fewer in number, but have larger clumps. Also, while checking the differences, taste should also be a major factor. But no matter what kind of 20s he tries, their taste always disappoint him. After their characteristics have been classified, the 20s can be crossbred. The fields are separated into 6 sections for each trait. Also, the colors of the flowers are slightly different, as some are white and some are yellow. Although the protagonist started doing it as a method to secure food, his half-baked experiments ended up becoming his daily routine. But then a startling revelation comes to him. These vegetables are also magical. A unique magic that he created fuses both the internal and external mana together. Whenever he uses magic, the fused mana is also consumed, so even if he tries to fuse the magic once again, he has no internal mana inside his body, so he can neither fuse his mana nor use magic. He is puzzled that if such a situation occurs, then what could be the solution, as it does recover over time, but not exactly the fastest way to get the internal mana back. So he concludes that by regularly eating the vegetables, he can restore them faster. He learned this fact after consuming them regularly. Another important question arises: which food replenishes the most amount of mana? Differences in the amount recovered can be seen in various breeds of 20s. The taste hasn't changed all too much, but he postpones this factor for later. At first, crossbreeding seemed quite mysterious to him, but now he really enjoys discovering something new every day. Soon, he begins sorting out those 20s that restore the most amount of mana. The protagonist is working too hard for a 3-year-old and really wishes there was a faster method to all that sorting, comparing, and prioritizing. He remembers how rice was sorted by dropping rice grains in salt water and then checking if they would float or sink. But this method won't apply to 20s because the pot bellies will sink anyway. The protagonist decides to expand the field. Now, earlier he couldn't concentrate without closing his eyes, but now he has gotten pretty used to it. Unexpectedly, he feels an unusual sensation at a short distance. He wonders about the shimmering heat slowly rising from his surroundings, but he is unable to recognize it. Soon, he concentrates the refined mana directly into his pupils. To his alarm, a pale blue gas rises from the field. He is struck by lightning when he finds out that the blue gas is rising from the 20s. The blue parts of the root leak out, escaping into the air. Excitedly, he turns around and begins to rip apart the bunches. He deduces that the ones that recover the most amount of mana are also the deepest shade of blue. In other words, the blue color represents mana. After that, the protagonist continues to observe and eat as he concentrates mana in his eyes. He discovers that the largest ones are dense with mana in the clumps of 5 to 6 20s. He chomps them down, being more hopeful, but as usual, they taste as horrible as before. Just like this, he continues spending his days working on genetics. At 5 years of age, he continues to discover even more things. He discovers a type that recovers a lot of mana. However, it doesn't have any immediate effects. He also finds out that when he concentrates mana into his eyes, the information that he gains from perceiving things changes. The protagonist is quite elated by his discovery. At night, he wonders if he were to concentrate mana into a different part of his body, something could happen. The smart guy has grabbed the right direction of thinking. He decides to experiment with his theory the next day. Until now, he has been circulating mana throughout his body and letting it seep out into the soil in order to use his magic. So instead of letting the mana flow out of his body, he lets it stay inside him. He uses the very popular body strengthening magic, and thanks to that, watering the crops becomes much easier, and he is able to expand the fields as well. So when mana is concentrated into specific body parts, it results in improved arm and leg strength. The guy keeps on crossing creative bounds when he ponders that in this way he can easily strengthen internal organs. He notices that the absorption and digestion rates have risen, and he kind of feels eerie though. In this way he has spent a lot of time managing the way he used his magic to suit the situation. Then one gloomy day, his father has to leave them suddenly, leaving the rest to his mother. His father, who has been a pillar of strength for their family and an ardent farmer, has to leave because he has been called to war. A large-scale conflict erupts, forcing most of the villagers to leave. The protagonist ponders sadly that he has always thought that this world's technology has been severely lacking. Now, he has reached the actual root cause of the problem, which is war. During more peaceful times, the villagers gather together and work to cultivate the land bit by bit. There is a surplus of available land, so how much one can cultivate is dictated by the area of land one owns. If there were no wars, then more fields could exist, leading to technological advances and higher prosperity. His mother senses his blues and assures him that this isn't the first time he has left. But the protagonist is far too practical to be emotional, and safely assumes that his self-made magic to create fields is crucial. Also, his fields are at an advantage, since taxes are proportional to how much land is used. But the con is the poor quality of the equipment, left by those who left for war. In other words, such men are used for infantry, and in turn receive injuries. This definitely means trouble, as the land around them can become turbulent, causing them to lose their homes, so a certain degree of war potential will also be needed. The protagonist remembers that some of the men had farming tools, but then would those ancient toys actually work in a war? Now, the protagonist has some memories of his previous life, and some of them might not be favorable. For this reason, he doesn't really want to kill anyone. He wants to keep weapons and armor to a bare minimum of what's required, and most important of all, he will be requiring more money because, let's face it, there can never be enough bread. Suddenly a woman comes along and wants to trade her potatoes for some 20s. Now, the protagonist is really frustrated because he is not in favor of the bartering system. After all, in that way, life inside the village doesn't generate enough money. The only way he can make a proper trade is through a merchant. His mother tries to be a beauty with real brains when she suggests making sandals and other types of shoes like boots, Zoris, and sneakers from dried 20 stalks. Those shoes can actually be used for everyday purpose, however. At first her suggestion is not up to our aristocratic protagonist's level, as he feels that her idea is completely inefficient. A merchant is someone who travels between towns and villages in order to peddle their wares. But then there is also the aspect of being able to negotiate the prices, so he is somewhat convinced and agrees that it might be a surefire way to make money. These sandals are painstakingly handmade, and while selling those sandals to a snooty merchant, the protagonist markets them by telling her that his mother taught him how to make those sandals, and he has been making them every day. The lady is convinced, and the first pair is successfully sold for a handful of worn-down copper coins. He clenches those coins and ponders that it's not like the merchants are ripping them off. The price of those sandals might be lower than he would have expected. Still, he feels that if he sells goods at this rate, then it would take forever to buy weapons. Out of the blue, the protagonist calls out to the same merchant and presses his hands on his arms. The startled merchant feels an eerie kind of pressure. It is revealed that it has been a few days since then, and he has managed to fish out the market prices from that troublesome merchant. Next, he begins experimenting with magical mushrooms. Based on the information he obtained, this should be a lucrative source of income. A shocking revelation is made to the protagonist by the merchant that mana restoratives do exist. He pressurizes the merchant more by using magic, and freaks out on learning this information, because according to him, something like that would be insanely expensive. The silver lining is that it seems as if the magical mushroom, the primary material, doesn't grow well and is in short supply. The merchant even shows him a sample magical mushroom for evidence, and remarks that this kind is pretty rare. However, to him, the sample just seems like a common shiitake mushroom. On the merchant's insistence, the protagonist tries the mushroom, and unlike what he had imagined, the taste is a bit plain. The sly guy uses his cultivation kit to Xerox shiitake. Basically, mushrooms grow from fungi on trees, which act as the primary source of nutrients. If magical mushrooms grow the same way that shiitake does, then the possibilities are endless. If an environment where the fungus can be easily grown were to be created, it would allow them to grow it artificially. Soon, he gets some previously dried wooden logs from an old man. That saved him a lot of work. Optimally, right balance of dryness and dampness is necessary. Afterward, he plants the fungus and waits for it to grow, but it isn't that easy. Now, a magical mushroom might contain a fair amount of mana in it. He wonders if it is robbing the tree of its nutrients. This might mean that it is stealing mana from it as well. Suddenly an idea strikes him, that he can actually give the logs his mana instead, so he decides to infuse different amounts of mana into each log. The poor lad begins to work exotically hard by tending to the fields during the day, infusing the logs with magic during the evening, and making sandals in the night. Then after waiting for some time, his hard work pays off, and 3 mushrooms pop out of a log. Now, although the quantity is minimal, the protagonist is excited that at least his idea is working. However, the curve of his mouth droops again in the opposite direction, as he realizes that in order to earn profits, he must be pooping mushrooms on a larger scale. Another major problem is space, as his house isn't big enough to incorporate more logs, as it is already jam-packed with 20 stalks, crops, and sandals. It dawns on him that rather than more storage space, he needs a dedicated building to conduct his experiments. It occurs to him that now he will need a new kind of magic to change the shape of the soil into a building shape as well. When using magic to create a field, he would raise the soil to create ridges. Soon, he heads for an architectural magical challenge. He drifts to an open space having a proper plan in his mind, as he feels that the mountains of soil here can be used as building materials. According to him, the rules of magic go into creating something out of nothing, and they can be incredibly difficult. Earth magic, for example, often exists in games. Soon, he uses the refined mana inside his body, collects it into the palm, and uses it to generate throwable gravel stones. The damage inflicted by the stone depends on the speed at which it travels. By visualizing the entire process, it can be done. He finds it incredibly cost-efficient as well, especially the part when one creates gravel, one shot and it is done. The consumption is way more manageable when one uses something that already exists. He is delighted when it sinks into him about his great affinity with earth magic. He places both his hands on the ground and registers that for some reason, he can only create magic properly when he is using dirt. He squeezes the soil hard to sense its soul and wonders if it would not be a problem if he could just convert the soil into metal. He knows that it's not a piece of cake though. After a pause, he concludes that instead, a good challenge would be to create a storehouse using soil. Unexpectedly, he feels as if all the energy has been sucked out of his body, and in no time he passes out completely, oblivious to his surroundings. The protagonist is bedridden for 2 days as he feels terribly sick. His mother anxiously looks after him. The reason why he suddenly collapsed was likely due to all of the mana in his body suddenly being ousted out, and he terms his condition as acute mana deficiency. His mother and his siblings are all upset with him for being so reckless. Originally, all of the mana inside him had been circulated throughout him to facilitate his physical strengthening magic. This involves using mana to enhance the body's physical capabilities. He has been lucky that it didn't devolve into a moment where one runs out of mana, or else his life would have ended. Despite having failed, the protagonist doesn't give up, but learns a valuable lesson. He is also glad that the magic failure didn't cause much wreckage. Normally, his mana shouldn't have been drained yet, and according to his bizarre scientific mind, the cause of the sudden mana consumption in his body is a very complex physics formula that even Einstein wouldn't have understood. That is the relation between area and volume. In simpler terms, he probably ended up consuming 10 times more mana than necessary. He decides to give up on building for now, which seems like a sensible thing to do at his age. He decides to start with something simpler, using architectural magic to successfully create perfect bricks. He predicts that if a complete amateur like him stacks the bricks together with no idea of what he is doing, the building will be complete, but it will seem more like a stacked Jenga. Fundamentally, brick creation falls under earth magic, but its applications are only increasing. Later, he reaches Mosaic Field, the fields cultivated by his ancestors for generations. But sadly they are not suitable for use anymore. For him the details are not important, however, this has sparked his curiosity. The fields seem so hopeless that he doubts that even a tractor can do anything about it. The protagonist has always felt proud of how his village appeared. Next, he uses a spell to clear the land and convert all of the stones and stumps into fertilizer for soil. Until now, the protagonist has learned 3 kinds of magic. Magic to cultivate fields, magic to strengthen the body or parts of the body, and magic to create bricks. Still, he feels that all that he has learned, magic to cultivate fields, is a bit lengthy. He places both his hands on the ground and keeps on chanting mantras to improve the soil quality. It is also evident that it is only he who can use these spells. Also, whenever he is using magic, he always ends up chanting spells. In no time, soil ridges are created and organized in neat columns. This is quite astonishing for him, as the spell activated the moment he chanted. Even if he is used to it, up until now, he would need to vividly imagine what he actually wants to do. But he is satisfied, as this turns out to be more efficient than he ever thought. Finally, the child wizard has managed to develop his own original magic style. He feels that chantless magic is pretty good, but it is also tiresome, because all that concentration and focus is making his head throb with pain. Another benefit of using magic via spell is that the range of the effects remains consistent throughout. The area appears to be roughly string-shaped, and seems to derive from the previous one that he used. While cultivating Twennes, without changing it, he can simply activate the magic inside his head, and then change the amount of soil being cultivated freely. The amount of mana being consumed would depend on the scope of the magic, but it should remain fairly consistent. According to him, this is only possible because he mumbles each time he casts a spell. Next, he begins experimenting and practices brick creating spells. After practicing for months, he finally manages to create a perfect brick to his delight. He is finally able to create bricks of the same size and mass. He analyzes that this is all conditional based, and relates the situation to an example of a Pavlov's dog. If one were to blow a whistle, each time the dog is fed, the dog would then begin drooling each time it heard the whistle. The condition, in this case, is casting the spell itself. Every time the brick creating spell is chanted, a brick is created automatically, hence, another bizarre law proved, thanks to the child physicist. The protagonist is glad that by trying many eccentric experiments, he has discovered many novel but freaky laws. This is how he gained the newest technique called spell casting. Not only that, he has also decided to give names to the body strengthening and soil improving spells. Somehow the other villages are creeped out for a while because of his outlandish ways. He gets a bit too carried away while experimenting and creates hordes of bricks to his mother's anxiety, who has no idea where to place them all. She makes a mommy-ish joke that if those were utensils instead, they would have been usable at least. With this she makes that sarcastic giggle that all children are usually apprehensive about. But face it, the protagonist is different from all, finds a ray of light in that infinite darkness, and thinks that his mother is a genius. He thinks that if it is possible to create bricks from the soil, then that means that he should be able to create tableware with the same raw ingredients. So he manages to expand his product line by creating a beautiful rice bowl, followed by utensils of all shapes and sizes. Still, his mother remarks with that goofy smile that she is impressed, but he must stop with immoderate ways, as now the house is filled with many extra crockery, and she has no idea what to do with it. But the mama's boy is determined to make his matron happy, so he decides to concentrate on quality instead of quantity. Until now, he has made unrefined earthen pottery, so next he creates a white teacup that pairs well with black tea. When his mother holds that white porcelain teacup and saucer, her eyes begin to dazzle with delight, as she has never seen pure white tableware before. The protagonist is satisfied and has a feeling that needing to use the exact material wouldn't be entirely necessary when using magic. Next, he decides to make something more exclusive for his mom. He is a mama's boy for sure, and paints an amateurish flowery design on the white teacup and saucer set. His mother is delighted, but the guy is not full yet as he frets over the fact that he doesn't have any artistic talent. So next, he decides to create tableware that isn't white porcelain. He has heard somewhere that it can be created from sea sand, and in his previous life, the protagonist used to store his drinking water in that kind of tableware. And voila, he manages to create a drinking cup made up of transparent glass. While experimenting tirelessly, he creates something new that hadn't been seen in the village, and potentially even outside it. His like of novelty includes sandals, magic mushrooms, bricks, and crockery. But still, he is paid peanuts by that stingy sly merchant, who also places a challenge in front of him to increase the magic mushroom production. The protagonist's ears prick up when the merchant wishes to speak to him about something. The guy has been looking for an opportunity to show the merchant his exclusive range of tableware. However, He is splashed with some icy water when the merchant expresses his desire to buy those spare bricks that he has heard are placed in his house. The merchant has heard that the protagonist has built something out of those bricks. The protagonist immediately guesses that the merchant is talking about that Jenga storehouse. The merchant snootily demands the boy to tell his parents to sell him those bricks. However, the latter frowns and informs him that those were created by him to the merchant's stupor. The protagonist immediately blurts out with starry eyes that he has made some exclusive tableware, and the merchant must check them out. But the merchant is only interested in bricks currently and promises that he will check out the tableware the next time. But the boy doesn't budge, places his hand on the merchant's arm, and pressurizes him to comply with his request. The merchant becomes helpless, and something in his mind compels him to obey the boy. Soon, the merchant checks out the amazing crockery made of porcelain, china, and glass and is quite amazed. He tries to probe into the boy about his methods, but the sly guy turns him down with a sugary smile. The merchant agrees to buy the tableware along with the bricks, but nothing changes as the protagonist is paid no more than 5 bronze coins for all the exotic goods. The boy's face darkens in a wicked shade with terrifying pale eyes. He digs his fingernails into the man's arms and begins to threaten him ominously. But this time the merchant is vigilant and shrugs the kid off. He insists that he is paying more than he normally does. Now he knows that there might be people who are willing to pay a good price for all that. But even though the tableware is lavish, no one would be ready to pay a fortune for it, because the people whom the merchant usually deals with are commoners, who live in small towns and villages. He reasons that the wealthy don't do business with common peddlers like him, who drive from town to town for business. The opulent usually deal with merchants whom they have known for a longer period. But the protagonist's mind is racing somewhere else. He is probing into ways to advertise his exotic products to the wealthy, who would actually buy them. He wants to make his products the hottest topic in the nobility, but the obstacles are innumerable, since there are no facilities for the internet or newspapers in this world to promote his products. The protagonist is distressed because he doesn't have any connections necessary to pull off an achievement like that. The protagonist feels that talking to this lame merchant is a total waste of time. The expressions on his face intimidate the merchant, who suddenly feels that the boy is giving an evil vibe. The merchant gleefully informs him that the market for bricks is thriving currently, so he will buy everything he has got the next time he is here. The protagonist sulks and vows that the next time he will have 10 times more bricks. Soon he goes on making more and more bricks, and one day the same merchant arrives. He is impressed by the number of bricks the protagonist has managed to generate, and has really come off his promise. The merchant butters him up that if it were another kid, he wouldn't have taken their word for it, but just because they have known each other for so long. Not only that, the merchant has also brought along something strong to carry all these uncountable bricks. The boy is horrified to see a huge dragon, and terms it as a monster. The merchant explains that the beast is called a dragon horse and is a work beast. The merchant assures him that the work beasts are very much different than true dragons. Work beasts are creatures raised from eggs as assistants for their owners. The work beast's egg grows by absorbing the mana of the owner. That's why they are highly obedient to their owner or parent as a result. Another striking feature about it is that the way it appears is based on the mana that's provided as the source of energy. In other words, it depends on whoever is hatching the egg. It's for this reason that those who are able to hatch strange or practical work beasts are heavily relied upon. Soon, when the last of a whole load of bricks is placed on the massive carts, the horse dragon is harnessed to them to pull through. In this world, overwhelmingly powerful dragons exist, and it is said that the horse dragons resemble the true ones. Since it's strong, tough, and brave, a horse dragon is pretty much popular nowadays. The others are the highly durable horse types. The bird types are popular too, since they can fly. Still, the protagonist wonders whether these beasts are expensive. The merchant readily affirms and explains that those beasts that are used as a mount are considered highly valuable assets. The boy begins to race his mind's horses that even if there is a demand for bricks right now, he doesn't know it will be always like this way, and he needs to secure a multitude of items that he can sell. He is thinking of seriously securing an egg of such a peculiar animal, but then he is not certain what would even be born from it, and he doesn't even know how it is hatched. If he were to get lucky, then he could make a whole lot of money. It is then the wide-eyed protagonist innocently expresses his desire to a startled merchant that he also wants to raise a work beast egg. The price of an egg is barely covered by the money he has made up to this point. He requests the merchant to bring an egg with him next time, and he would buy it from him. The merchant feels agitated by that over-exuberant and overachieving kid. One day, while the protagonist and his mother are busy with their usual chores, they are surprised by his father's unexpected return. The protagonist's younger sibling, his parents' fourth child, goes rushing happily toward his father's arms. His father is happy to see them all. His mother suggests that they must get something nice from the merchant to celebrate. She wonders whether the protagonist can lend her some money, and she promises to pay him back the next time. The boy regretfully informs her that he has no money. The mother gives a disappointed smile, as even she doesn't have any bread left. Suddenly, the protagonist is transported to a flashback when he is 3 years old, and his mother suggests him to grow blue 20s. However, the protagonist is a little doubtful, because the 20s taste awful and don't sell for much either. Also, such a small child can't work in fields. But still, he stares at his mother intently, feeling all motivated. This mother always had a powerful grip on him. Soon the protagonist leads his parents to the fields, where neat ridges are already created. Both parents are thoroughly surprised by the enthusiasm shown by their young genius, who has instantly transformed the infertile land into a usable space. They sigh in awe as they think their youngest bubble is too amazing to think that he wants to earn money from such a tender age. Now, all those previous oohs and ahs are converted into rigorous probing and grilling, and this creates a fire inside the protagonist, who is a fiery 5-year-old now. He remembers the time when his mother used to always compliment him about being too amazing, and then bashfully, he used to explain that he wanted to save some money for the future. The mother was always in awe of him, about how he had been dealing with the merchants all by himself, not to mention the magical mushroom that he cultivates. Not only that, but he also built a storehouse all by himself. He sometimes surprised her with just how much he pushed himself, not to mention the time when he created her very first white tableware for her. But now, his mother is really furious at him for throwing away all of that hard-earned money just to buy a working beast egg, without even consulting her first. The boy fretfully tries to convince her that once the egg is hatched, they will make even more money out of it. However, his mother is doubtful, because if all this hatching game were that easy, then everyone would have been rich by now. His mother explains that she has heard stories where people are sold eggs from random animals, since they rarely ever hatch. So buying a work beast is like gambling away with one's entire fortune. Now, the poor protagonist is about to get a heart attack because he was fooled by that tyrant merchant, who never enlightened him about the low success rate in hatching. His mother keeps on chiding him that she lets him buy and sell things because she wants to save up money for the future, and that how men end up spending everything so quickly. Here the father is targeted as well. The boy assures her that everything will be fine, and he also reminds her that he earned all the money by himself, so it should be completely fine if he spends it. The angelic mother suddenly becomes a wicked witch of the West. Her face darkens ominously, and she growls at him for being so unreasonable. She protests angrily that the money wasn't entirely his, as he also sold the sandals that everyone worked together for. The protagonist knows that he is really in hot water for saying all that crap, and becomes more alarmed when his mother threateningly points at him and forbids him to buy anything in the future without her permission. The protagonist protests like a spoiled, obstinate 5-year-old, but is immediately shown his true place by his lovely mother, as his siblings hear him wailing and begging for forgiveness. But the mother doesn't stop, and wants him to reflect on his mistake. After a while, a dejected and dismayed protagonist ponders that his young and lovely mother becomes terrifying when she is upset. While still sobbing, he analyzes that the money they made from sandals was barely enough, and most of it came from the bricks he made. He suddenly becomes motivated, thinking that he is the one in charge of making bricks and selling them to the merchant. But still, he is a kid and has no choice. But then he decides to game up the system a bit and secretly save up some cash, because everything is about the egg to him, his only asset. To secure the egg, he creates an egg-holding net woven from 20 stalks. He attaches it with a sling and wears it over him. Now, he can safely carry the egg wherever he goes. According to him, it's better to keep the egg as close to him as possible, so it can absorb its owner's mana. He deciphers that having multiple people all at once helping out to hatch the egg is possible, but everyone's mana is a bit different, which would make it difficult to hatch the same type of work beast each time. He can certainly feel the egg, absorbing his mana just by holding it. He stares at the egg intently, and realizes although the egg itself has very little mana in it, it has this blue haze around him. He wonders whether putting his own mana in it will be a good idea. Soon, he brings the egg closer to himself and tries to inhale its blue haze within himself. After a while, the protagonist is wild with a frenzy when he checks out that the egg has turned even a darker shade of blue and is sparkling insanely. It appears that the mana he put into it got absorbed. He is not certain how much mana he should be using for the egg. He secretly orders the egg to soak properly in the haze. Since then, he has been watching over and ingesting his mana to the egg every day. He feels a need to create a secret hideout for himself, but he remembers his mother's warning that since he is a kid he must not spend money all by himself. And as a kid, he really despises the antiquated customs of this place. The father, who is the patriarch of the family, makes all the decisions that are final, and while he is away, the eldest son takes that position. The protagonist remembers that he started saving up money so he could afford a weapon, since it would be important towards making a name for himself in a war. But according to the customs, the second son and below are forced to spend their entire lives under the thumb of their eldest brother, or must become independent. From that point onwards, the protagonist makes a very critical decision for his life apart from making weapons. He should start preparing to stand on his own 2 feet, and he must strike the iron when it is hot. The protagonist resolves to check the borderline of the village where he was born in, and finds out that it is surrounded by a fence. Outside the border is a deep and dense forest. In the past, once the land was secure enough, trees were cut down and cultivated to build a village. The protagonist jumps over the fence to get to the other side, and continues pondering that with the wars constantly going on, the village is doing its best to maintain the status quo with the fields, but they are still getting smaller. The land outside the village has no owner besides those who cultivate it. He delves deeper into the forest to find a place to build a house for himself. The boy has yet to go through all that toil again, so he decides to use body enhancement magic so he can keep his fatigue at bay no matter how much work he does. Next, he stoops down, places both his hands on the ground, and begins to pat it. By doing this, he feels for the roots of the nearby tree. He uses magic to loosen the strong grip of the roots from the ground. After a while, the roots are not able to support the weight of the trunk. The trees begin to crumble away slowly from the ground, and in no time fall down with a crash. The triumphant protagonist decides to use this method to bring down other trees as well. Later, all of the trees in the way of a spot where he wants to build a nice abode for himself are removed. Next, he places his hands and uses a spell to flatten the 10 by 4 meter area of the clearing. He repeats the spell a few more times to prepare a massive flat area. Yet again, he is thankful for being able to use magic, as it is so convenient to use. Now, he wants to use magic that would be able to make a building in one shot, but he already fainted once before, so he decides to give that thought a pass. The lad frets out, as now he has to perform that painstaking task of creating bricks from scratch. Suddenly, it occurs to him that he really doesn't need to build a house in one go, as according to his analysis, the amount of mana it takes to make something depends on the area and volume of the object he is trying to create. When making a building all at once, the interior space of the building also counts as part of calculations for the amount of mana it consumes, so this can be quite dangerous and wasteful as well. Next, he decides to create individual walls in a systematic and orderly fashion. He uses the bricks he has been making as the base, and then secures the bricks with mortar. Soon, he flashes the mental prototype of a single wall. Soon, he manages to create a Rubik's Cube version of a building, and then to give it a house-type look, he decides to add a roof and door by hand. After some time, he is successfully able to create his own hideout amidst the forest. Next, he checks out the egg, and to his amazement, it has grown twice its size and has become almost the color of mana, which is dark blue. He predicts that it will be hatching quite soon. His thoughts are disturbed by his mother, who urges him to come out as it is time to go. This year the protagonist is turning 6, and now he will be getting his baptism at the church in his village. The protagonist is all excited, but slightly restless as well. It appears that there are no more than 10 people at the church, since it is a small village of course. He cannot really remember his baptism ceremony in his previous life, and he might not have been very happy about it. The priest raises his hand to begin the baptism, and the lad gets all hyped up, because finally he will be named, and with that, he will be able to use household magic like drinking water, illumination, cleansing, fire, etc. According to him, humanity has always feared monsters and lived lives hiding from them. However, many people have become able to use household magic, and the number of places where humans can survive has become much broader. The humans are a weaker race and cannot defeat monsters by themselves, but now they have obtained abilities to form large settlements in prosperous places. But this has also become the driving force of humanity's rapidly increasing population. So in the church, citizens receive household magic through a baptism ceremony. The church receives its followers, and the feudal lord also receives a register of names as well, a system in which everyone can benefit in place. The priest announced that everyone going through that ceremony must wait for their turn. Later, when he meets the priest on account of his baptism, the priest informs him that with this naming, he will receive the divine protection of their master and receive the ability to use magic. The priest warns him that the magic should only be used to improve human lives. The protagonist is sworn upon the holy book that he will not abuse the use of magic for any reason. When he agrees, the priest opens the holy book, and the protagonist is amazed by its beautiful bindings and decorations. He wonders whether the book is made up of parchment, then it is perhaps a name lexicon or something. Dramatically, the priest smoothens out the book, drawing out his hand to christen Ashira and Mary's third child in the holy light of the church. The protagonist is ultimately named Ars, and from now onwards will be addressed by this name. As the priest chants some more magical verses, tears begin to flow from Ars's eyes, as he can feel the magic power concentrating on the palm of the priest's hand. When it is done, the priest thrusts his palm forward, and flashes a magical pattern, and soon the magical power is enforced in his brain. He has always wondered what will happen when magical power is concentrated in the brain, and the memory preservation magic that comes out of it is unexpectedly useful. Leaving aside the magical circle, Ars feels that new information is being inserted directly into his mind. Finally, going through all those complexities, he is able to use household magic. The first magic spell he tries is his childhood favorite Illuminate, and brilliantly lights up the whole area. But he notices that household magic is of standardized level. There is no difference between the magic of a kid who has just learned to use it and an adult who has been using it for several years. Even improving one's magical power didn't have any noticeable change on the effectiveness of the magic. The kid is never happy and sulks over the fact that now he can't drastically increase the power of ignition and blow everything in flames. Ars is thoroughly dismayed, because he had hoped that he would be able to use magic other than earth magic after he had obtained baptism. A dejected Ars decides to leave the household magic aside, and focuses on his other fruits of labor, which is the priest's magic circle. Ars wants to delve deeper into that pattern of enchantment, to be able to understand more about this world's magic. But then he tries to probe and grill the subject, but all his attempts and sleepless nights are futile. The pattern is quite complicated in the first place, because Ars is unable to understand the letters in it. He is even unable to understand the modern letters of this world, let alone the ancient ones, as until now all he has done is research about food and magic since his inception. The poor guy's literacy rate is so low that he is even unable to write his own name. His muddled up thoughts are interrupted by a sudden cracking sound, followed by faint chipping. In his stupor, the egg is finally about to hatch. Ars ponders with a furiously palpitating heart about the kind of beast that will be born from that egg. After much time-consuming rolling, cracking, and popping sounds, Ars begins to get impatient, but he knows that it will be a bad idea to help that egg get through. Soon there is a massive ultimate cack, and a pleasurable neigh can be heard. In no time, a beautiful baby beast can be seen staring at his surroundings in sheer bewilderment. Ars is more astonished to find that the adorable little baby horse is trying to stand on its own 4 feet, despite being at its infantry stage. He encourages it to do so, while the poor beast trembles and shakes while struggling in its endeavor. At last, its perseverance pays off and it magnificently stands on its hoofs, with its little head high depicting pride. Ars claps for its gallantry and playfully pets its mane. He is very impressed by animals, trying their hardest that touch the heart. Ars thanks the little beast for entering his life. He looks at the work beast more carefully, and guesses that it seems like a cross between a horse and a reindeer. The beast has a thorough and robust figure, but with shiny Barbie-like long hair. Ars wonders whether the dainty beast will be able to carry all the stuff once it grows up. Ars is too much engrossed in admiring the beast's beauty that he is brought back to reality by a sudden crunching sound. The horse is actually chewing eggshells out of hunger. He wonders whether it is okay for the baby horse to munch down those shells. Now the issue arises of feeding the baby horse what it actually eats. Usually, the work beast formed inside an egg depends on the magic used for their nourishment. Usually, dragon horses are carnivores. This is quite stressful for Ars because providing meat to a work beast regularly would become expensive for a poor farmer like him. He begins to panic as he remembers someone telling him that it is almost impossible to raise a work beast due to its feeding cost. While he is fretting over it, he hears the work beast munching something vigorously and finds out that it is readily feeding on those extra 20s lying around. Suddenly, he has an idea to feed it with the radish grown in the excess land near the hideout. The beast seems to love them and crunches and munches down merrily. Ars guesses that at any rate, the beast is a herbivore. Never heard of a carnivorous horse before though. However, the way the horse is hogging the veggies, Ars is still relieved that now he will not get bankrupt at all due to the extra 20s. After the horse is full, it stares at his master dreamily. Next, it climbs up to his lap, cuddles him, and falls fast asleep. Now Ars is a little flustered because it wants the beast to grow as fast it can. But then he looks at the cute little thing snoring so peacefully that he gently strokes him. However, only after 10 days, Ars is flabbergasted to find that the little horse is not so little anymore and has grown into a young stallion. Even Ars is somewhat intimidated by its overwhelming appearance. Soon he decides to name his work beast, as previously he didn't name it, in order to avoid getting emotionally attached to it. Ars decides to use a special naming method for the horse beast, which has used a magic circle. Although the priest called household magic the divine protection of God, Ars has a feeling that the program household magic is written into one's head through a magic circle. Because if the beast acquires some magic, then at least it would be able to acquire its own drinking water. With no running water or sufficient medical treatment, if the horse happens to drink water from the area and gets diarrhea, then death is inevitable. He begins to think hard, but no suitable name comes into his mind. Also, he has no confidence in his naming sense and his artistic sense. For instance, he knows that a one-horned horse is a unicorn, then a two-horned will be called a bicorn. His mind begins to play a freaky word game that completely boggles him. Suddenly, a beautiful name comes to his mind, which is Valkyrie, the goddess of war from legends. When he looks at his work beast, its silver-white shiny fur makes it appear kinda holy. Ars confirms with the horse whether it approved of the name Valkyrie. The latter nods readily. But why is it squeaking repeatedly, as horses are supposed to neigh? But Ars is excited, as he believes that Valkyrie is able to understand human language. Soon he begins with the naming ceremony and positions himself on the ground. He closes his eyes for a better focus and breathes heavily. Recently he has been able to refine magic as naturally as breathing. He decides to use magic carefully and delicately this time. He is going to completely fill up himself as a vessel with dense magic. He concentrates all that magical power on his finger. It is hard to keep the released magic in place though, so from here on out he has to focus. He exhales slowly, emits the magic through his finger like spray, and directs it to the magic circle hovering just above Valkyrie. Ars feels that manipulating magic outside of the body has a noticeably larger burden. He focuses and recreates every detail of the magic circle he memorized through the thread of magic. He can sense his blood flowing to his head. His brain's blood vessels feel like they are about to rupture. Soon, with great strength and energy, he manages to finish the whole magic emitting and naming procedure. The poor guy is deadbeat and sweating heavily, but he managed it somehow. Soon the magic pattern disappears when the enchantment process has ended. Ars dropped down on his knees, fully drained, shaking wildly, as this was a lot more burdensome than he expected. However, on the brighter side, things would have been worse if the whole thing failed. Next, he calls out to Valkyrie to try using some magic. Valkyrie immediately stands upright and nods in affirmation, as if it gone through rigid military training. Now, Ars ponders that it will be dangerous to have a fire inside the house, so he brings Valkyrie to a clearing. And there Valkyrie begins to dance on its steps, using the mesmerizing illumination spell. To Ars's astonishment, it casts such magnificent illumination that nearly blinds the whole surrounding. Ars begins to jump with joy as Valkyrie can use magic so well. He urges her to use some more magic spells. Soon, one after another, Valkyrie displays ignition, drinking water, and cleansing spells. However, the perfectionist Ars is still not satisfied, because sure enough Valkyrie is also generating ordinary levels of household magic spells. While he is sitting down sulking as always, something catches his eye as the bricks around him lift by themselves and begin to float in the air. Ars is stunned and freezes where he is, as he doesn't know how the miracle is happening. On a closer look, Ars finds out that the spells of brick making, ground flattening, and soil enhancement are also being done with no strings attached. Also, the not-so-obvious spells of magical infusion and physical enhancement are happening without his interference. He can swear upon his eyes that Valkyrie even displayed memory preservation magic. The horse beast begins to scamper here and there like a troubled soul emitting magical wonders. Ars watches her in awe, and then feels a kind of self-pity that the other kids like him who received the name at the church's baptism can only use ordinary household magic, but then there is a possibility that the naming method is wrong. His mind keeps on spinning, questioning wildly how Valkyrie is able to use her own magic, or was there an error in the magic circle? He begins to fret over endlessly. A while later he composes himself, pats the ground, and calls out to Valkyrie for attention. He creates an earthenware utensil from the soil and asks her whether she can do the same. However, this time Valkyrie is clueless about what he is trying to get at, and this makes Ars realize that Valkyrie can only use the same spells as his after being named. For example, Ars can change the size of the land by flattening and costumes an amount of magic equivalent to the size of the land. However, the only form of ground flattening Valkyrie can achieve is a uniform 10 square meters. In other words, by being named, one can receive magic. However, it is limited to the spells the naming master has, and they cannot be altered. So the question arises in his mind that the naming ritual is more systematic than the divine protection of God. That explains Ars's inability to customize the household magic. Still, he lauds Valkyrie for having excellent capabilities. He wonders whether it will be safe to sell Valkyrie, who can use his original magic, as well as the household magic that the church has strictly prohibited for misuse. He decides to confirm it, from who else but that snooty, sly, and scheming merchant. Even the merchant is taken aback, because he has never heard of a work beast that can use magic. Ars realizes that the one thing he has experienced in this world is the true value of correct information. If a merchant who has done business everywhere hasn't heard about magical work beasts, then he is probably right. And the magical work beasts either don't exist or are pretty rare. However, the sly merchant's curiosity pricks up and wonders whether Ars's egg has hatched yet. Ars replies in a bored tone that a horse has been hatched out of it. The merchant becomes exuberant with curiosity and requests Ars to let him have a look at the beast. The guy is so impatient that he repeatedly jumps and flings on the sides to have a peek. Now, Ars has trained Valkyrie not to use her magic in front of strangers, especially the sneaky sly merchant. Ars tells him to hold his horses as he brings his work beast in front of him. On seeing Valkyrie, the merchant is mesmerized by the size and beauty of the magnificent stallion. He is in awe, because according to him, although it can carry stuff, the selling point is the fantastic white color that the big shots usually long for. Ars immediately shoots back that he has no intention of selling Valkyrie. Now, the merchant is surprised, because why a magnificent beast like that cannot be sold by Ars? Because initially, he bought the egg with his entire fortune, and was left completely broke. Ars begins to blush furiously, depicting how fond of Valkyrie he has become, and he is also planning to keep her by his side. To be honest, more than her beauty, Ars is interested in her ability to use magic. Now, Valkyrie begins to trot and squeak uncomfortably, so Ars instantly blurts out that he also wants so dearly to keep her by his side. He immediately grabs her head and cuddles it affectionately. Now Valkyrie is a work beast, and for this reason, she was paying attention to their conversation, and didn't want to leave Ars's side as well. Ars feels more secure having her, because having Valkyrie who has more power than a mere kid like him will help with manpower. The merchant is not ready to give up either and wants to make a deal with Ars. He mentions that he has 5 beast eggs that he will readily give to Ars, but for that, the latter has to pay a price. He will be giving the eggs to Ars, and after Ars has hatched and trained them properly, the merchant will buy the beasts from him. Ars immediately understands him, to the merchant's relief, who grins from ear to ear. He assures Ars that if he raises the beasts well, then he will have no trouble finding a buyer for him. Even if it is a loss at first, there is plenty to make it back. The merchant feels quite safe and secure trading with Ars, as he knows him since the time he sold sandals. However, Ars has also gotten a lot smarter from his sandal selling days version, so he also decides to set the minimum terms. The merchant has a bad feeling about that. He gives him a list of the minimum conditions, which include getting beast eggs for free from the merchant, his sole decision of the number of work beasts to sell. The 1-year contract can be renewed, but with updated terms, the merchant is free to break the contract. If he faces a substantial loss, the amount will be decided from case-to-case basis. The merchant deciphers that, as he expected, Ars is a real cunning fellow, but the deal is signed anyhow. Ars is elated, because he has finally found a way to earn an exorbitant amount of stash, as no rural farmer can even think of. He vows that no matter what happens, he will get the business off the ground, and from now on he will work harder than ever. Soon, he decides to properly ingest the eggs with his mana. He is horrified when Valkyrie grabs one of the eggs from the nest and warns her not to eat them. He is about to have a heart attack when he suspects that one of the eggs has been broken, but thankfully that is only his illusion. It is then he realizes her true intention, that she only wants to raise those eggs. Not only that, but she also uses a spell to inject her mana inside the eggs to his astonishment. He wonders whether Valkyrie was born a nurse, as she kinda understands that eggs need to absorb magic in order to develop. However, the notion is not favorable, because Valkyrie doesn't understand that the form the work beasts take on after birth depends on the magic they absorb. But it's pointless, as she has already injected her magic into 3 eggs. However, Ars lightens up because it is possible to incubate an egg with the magic of different people, so he leaves the 3 eggs to Valkyrie and instructs her to take good care of them until they hatch properly. Ars suddenly has a memory of his past life when one day he found a stray dog, so at first it seemed that he was taking care of it by feeding it on regular basis, but then the prices of food and immunization were all paid by his parents. At first, his parents were not very pleased to see an extra burden, which was quite shocking for him. But then his parents allowed him anyway, thinking that he will be the one looking after the puppy all by himself. Now, he feels that his parents were right. Looking after living things is a troublesome activity. Soon the eggs are hatched, and to his surprise, the appearance of all is more or less similar to Valkyrie. Now, looking at their food intake, he realizes that the existing fields are not enough, so he decides to cultivate more fields in the forest. Soon he takes his whole army of Valkyries to the forest, and uses the same method of softening the dirt around the roots and removing the trees. Soon after the removal of trees, he uses the soil preparation magic spell to create even ridges. The fields are finally complete, but soon Ars freaks out again, as he has completely forgotten to name the work beasts. But then he is hit by a lightning bolt that still the work beasts can use magic without even being named. He wonders whether work beasts are subjected to different rules than humans. He begins to lose his marbles, thinking that now all his beasts will be able to use magic, but then maybe they will listen to Valkyrie if she told them not to do so. Greatly fatigued, he gives up on overthinking and decides to expand the fields. People measure the size of a field with the help of the number of domes, because more or less it is considered a standard. Ars looks around him in amazement as he realizes that the size of the fields before him is at least as wide as being unable to count the widths in domes in hand. At first, being an environment-conscious person, he thinks about how much destruction he caused just by creating fields. But he is calmed down when he learns that the area was previously covered with fields after the population decline and the lessening of industrial boom. The area was again forested. Plus, he only expanded the field area for animals to have food. Still, he feels that the fields have gotten a lot wider, and now his hideout seems at a great distance. To reduce the distance, he decides to use the work beasts as normal riding horses as well. For that, he will need a saddle or stirrup. Now, no one in the village can help him in this regard, so his father suggests that a horse can easily pull a cart. Now, Ars is not very pleased with the idea, because work beasts with carts seem quite ordinary. However, riding a magnificent beast seems like a glamorized idea, having in mind the goons of the wild, wild west. Also, Ars wants to be on the battlefield one day, and he knows that learning to ride Valkyrie will be a great advantage to him. So he resolves to mount on Valkyrie without any facilities, hoping that the idea would work. Naturally, riding a living thing that moves according to its own whims requires skill, but riding Valkyrie is easier than Ars thought it would be. Valkyrie, whom he raised with his own magic, is intelligent enough to move in a way that is not at all burdensome to him. But constant riding without a saddle did damage something, as he wobbles and staggers balancing himself with the help of a wall, yelping with whole body muscle pain.